Thank you, dear friend, for your beautiful practice tonight. This teaching of the 8 consciousnesses is based on the Buddha's original teachings on consciousness, but expanded a little bit further by later Buddhist disciples, especially in the later Mahayana tradition of Buddhism. So, first, you all know about the 5 consciousnesses. Usually, what is it? Eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and skin. These are the forms of the body, but those are not yet the consciousnesses. Those are the organs through which the consciousnesses perceive, right? So there's also what's called eye consciousness, or we'll call that seeing or vision, hearing, or there's some fancier words. Smelling, tasting, touching. But there's also the 6th consciousness. You talk about it sometimes in this culture on 6th sense, but it's very simple. 6th consciousness is simply mind consciousness. Thinking consciousness. Okay, so the Buddha taught about the 6 consciousnesses, which use the organs of perception. I guess I should make a brain here. I don't know how to. Anyway, these are organs of perception. Now, what's interesting about the 6 consciousnesses is that you still have these 6 consciousnesses even when you no longer are in this physical body. People who have had near-death experiences where, their body dies in some way, their heart stops or their brain dies or something, but then they have all these perceptions, they can still see and hear and all these other things. Because consciousness is not produced by the organs of the body. Consciousness perceives through them, but is not limited to them. So, when we talk about the 6 consciousnesses, these are just 6 different ways we perceive things. Usually we perceive them through the body, but as you develop your on the path of awakening, at some point you may even start awakening the ability to perceive beyond the physical organs. This is what's called psychic abilities. So you can start seeing things, hearing things, perceiving things, even though it's not through the physical organs. Now, it's very important to Buddhism that we develop certain other abilities before we start developing our psychic abilities, such as our ability to be wise and compassionate, to develop our loving kindness, morality, ethical behavior, and develop our vow of wanting to be enlightened, not just for ourselves, but so that we can serve all beings. So we develop this. It's very important to develop all of this as a foundation, because what can happen is if you start developing your psychic abilities in a very advanced way before you develop wisdom and compassion and ethical behavior, then you might misuse some of your abilities and harm people. Now, in the Zen tradition, we try to de-emphasize the cultivation of psychic abilities. But that doesn't mean that we don't believe that they exist or that they can be useful. In fact, one Zen teacher wrote in one of her books how her psychic sensitivity was very, very heightened because of meditation practice over several years. And it came to a point where she knew what was for lunch. before they were announcing what was for lunch. She just knew. But she didn't think much of it because who cares? It doesn't matter. They're going to serve it anyway. But if you do develop a certain intuition in your practice, and if you have a good foundation in wisdom and compassion, you can actually use these developed consciousnesses, psychic abilities, for the service of your true heart's vow of helping others. For example, people who are in psychotherapy or counseling professions, or in some way trying to listen to others, they can develop the ability to know things so that they can hone in on what the client really needs to help them. So, in other words, they can use their intuitive abilities to really kind of cut through all the stuff and go to the core issue for the person. And that's a good thing. From time to time, I've experienced suddenly knowing something or suddenly sensing something and knowing what to say and how to say it for someone or what someone was going through. So it happens. And all of us have these innate abilities that are not bound by just the physical senses. We can sense things beyond the physical. But anyway, that's not really what I'm trying to teach about today. I just thought I'd share that with you. The 6 consciousness, but I talked about 8 consciousness, didn't I? Mm-hmm. So, and there's also another developed teaching later on called the 9 consciousness. But anyway, I don't know if we'll get into that tonight. So, now, beyond the 6 consciousnesses, let me just put thinking here. Thinking consciousness. Now, the 8th consciousness, so you got 5 here, the 6th, I'll talk about 7 in a minute, but then the 8th consciousness is alaya consciousness, which can be sort of translated as store consciousness. It's basically where all of your experiences, memories, thoughts, everything is stored, in sort of a memory bank, all the different things you've inherited from your ancestors as well as past lives, and everything is contained in that storehouse of all of your seeds of thoughts and potentials. So that's store consciousness, alaya consciousness. Now, but we talked about 8, and so we haven't mentioned the 7th yet. And the 7th consciousness according to Buddhist teachings, is sort of the culprit for our suffering and our unhappiness. Because what happens is you perceive either through the physical or the non-physical, seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching. You process it through the mind, which also functions through the brain and other parts of the body, in thinking, processing. And of course, you can also have thinking be without perceiving through these other ways too. That's why the mind is also its own consciousness. Like for instance, you're dreaming. When you're dreaming, you're creating all kinds of perceptions, but they're not from the physical eyes and other things like that. So the mind can just produce. The mind just makes thoughts happen. So then it gets it's understood and perceived in the thinking mind, and then it's stored in the store consciousness, and then whatever the store consciousness remembers from other things, it will bring back into your conscious mind from the subconscious mind. Okay. The problem is there's a 7th consciousness between, which distorts what is perceived before it stores it through interpretation, and then brings it back up through distortion. And so that's why we have so many problems. We're not really perceiving things truly as they are, but through a lens of distortion in the 7th consciousness. So I would call this ego consciousness. The seventh consciousness is responsible for trying to see everything through the lens of me, my, mine. And so everything is filtered and interpreted and put a value judgment on based on how it relates to me, mine, or my, right? Which distorts it because things are no longer just what they are. Now they are what they are in relation to how I feel about it or I perceive it in relation to me. So what happens is things in the world that are very, very pleasurable, we want to then grasp and own it. They are not just things. Like a flower is no longer a flower. It's like, I want that flower. It's something to be possessed. It's no longer just a flower, or maybe something, I don't know, the color blue, which maybe is I hate the color blue. Now it's no longer just this color, but now it's an evil color. Right? Because that's how it is for me. So that, and then of course things that are neutral to me. So you got pleasurable things that are, unpleasant to me, I push away. Things that are pleasurable, I want to grasp. Neutral things, they don't even exist to me. I could care less. So even though each person in this room is very valuable in and of yourself, but if I filter you, my perception of you through this seventh consciousness, and I don't know who you are, and I don't really care, well, I could care less, right? And we do that to everything. And yet everything is precious, but we judge certain things as doesn't matter, right? And we ignore a lot of things in our universe. We ignore so much that could actually be of benefit to us. So the Buddha taught that our practice then is to transform the seventh consciousness, to transform this distorted sense of egoic self. And if we can transform that, then everything else will be fine. Will function as it is. So, now, if you be careful though, this does not mean that our practice is to destroy the seventh consciousness. Okay? There's nothing actually bad about the ego self-consciousness. It has a place and a function in our reality. The problem is, it is right now in its immature form. And our practice is to bring it into its more mature form. So, I don't know if I'm covering this up visually from some people. Can you see now better? Okay. Hello. So, we're not trying to destroy the ego. It has its place, but we want the ego to be to have its place in the context of a greater consciousness. A saying that came to me a few days ago. I heard something and it just made a little bumper sticker kind of quote in my mind. I come up with some of those. I should probably create bumper stickers. Would you buy one? But Brother ChiSing's bumper stickers, right? Anyway, from ego self to eco self. From ego self to eco self. In other words, our practice is to get out of the limited, small-minded, ego individual self consciousness, separate individual consciousness, and to expand and awaken to our ecological oneness with everything, our interbeingness, and that our true self is not this separate little self. Our true self is this plus all of you, plus this planet, plus the solar system, plus the whole universe, plus all of the realms of infinite reality, whatever they are called. So this is our true self. And so as we practice, we awaken and we become enlightened, and our ego then matures and becomes a true servant to our true nature. See, the problem right now is that the ego consciousness is just kind of has a big head. It really thinks it's the boss. It's just a misperception of the way things really are, because our ego, individual self, is not the boss, but the servant of the greater true self, this true nature. So, as we practice transformation, keep that in mind, because every time you perceive, see what happens a microsecond after the perception. What kind of judgment, how are you relating to it from a small self point of view, rather than just letting it be what it is. Just notice how you immediately do that, and see that part of you that does that. That's the seventh consciousness. So through meditation and mindfulness, you can actually perceive it more clearly. That's why, meditation isn't just to make you peaceful. It's to help you to be able to see more clearly. And when you can perceive more clearly, you can then start transforming and letting go of that graspingness of the seventh consciousness. One example of this is a couple of years ago, a couple of times in the past few years, I entered into a state of, maybe you might call it samadhi, just for a day or a few days. One actually happened, I guess, lasted maybe for a week or two. But anyway, it's just a state of oneness and bliss and non-resistance, and nothing could just faze me. I mean, someone could say something, and it just didn't bother me. Nothing could bother me. I just was like accepting, and I was just letting go, and I was just being. It was great. But because it had happened a couple times before, this time, the last time, I was trying to really be mindful to see the moment when I would fall out of that state. Okay? Because I already knew you can't cling to it, because you're going to come in and out of states, whether they're great states or bad states, whatever. It's just impermanence. But I was using it now as a practice to be mindful. Okay, what makes it go? What makes me fall out of that state of oneness and non-resistance? And this time I caught myself, and I realized that the moment I fell out, and it's just terrible when I do, because it's like so blissful. So the contrast is just overwhelming. But instead of being upset about falling out of it, I was using it to practice. Okay, so what can I learn from this? Not how much can I cling to the state of bliss, but what can I learn about what I do in my mind that makes me come out of it? And I realized it was the very moment I said in my consciousness, mine! How dare you? Like, this is mine, It's like, it was the seventh consciousness, and I saw it very clearly, and then, so my energy went from this beautiful smoothness to, raggedy and just like, oh, no, there's like, oh, I gotta defend myself, oh, don't like that. It's like, and, so this time, instead of being upset about falling out of samadhi, I just used it to learn. Okay, so every time I cling to me, my, mine, and a separate, like, this is mine versus this is yours, when I choose, there's a microsecond choice that you make, and this time I saw it. So I was very, 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 so I was actually glad that I learned something, and so anyway, so that's what we can all do as we practice this, moment to moment. See when you start suffering. See if you can see what the thought is, or the movement in your seventh consciousness. What is it that it's doing that precipitates that suffering? But it happens so fast, you won't be able to catch it unless you practice mindfulness very consistently. And daily meditation is very helpful in that as well. Now, this also relates to another teaching which I won't go into tonight, but I'll just give you a little preview. As I was meditating on this, I realized that this also corresponds to the Buddha's teachings on the 5 aggregates, or the 5 composites of our human experience. Form is the body, feelings is, the sensations, thinking is the perception, and then mental formations and volition kind of go together in the ego, because the ego has its own kinds of ideas, and it also makes choices in how it relates to these ideas. And then, of course, store consciousness. So, as we meditate and practice mindful living, we can really start being mindful. First we start being mindful of the form. I'm mindful of the body, I'm mindful of the breath. That's why we start with the body and the breath, because it's easier, because it's more tangible. But then as you keep deepening your practice, you can start practicing with your feelings, as you feel things, and then as you perceive things and think about things, and thoughts, looking at your thoughts, and then deeper, looking at your volition, mental formations, and then, of course, kind of understanding your whole consciousness. Well, I hope this teaching was helpful to you. Just to let you know that there's a lot more to the practice than just, sitting still and being peaceful. It's more about insight and wisdom too, and that's very important, because what good is it if you're blissful but not helpful? So please be able to be helpful as well as blissful. It's very important. Amitabha.